You're listening to Artistic Finance, show 175. On today's show, we talk with lighting designer Travis McHale about business and finance as a theater designer. We discuss self-filing taxes, negotiating rates, reasons to be investing, paying off mortgages early, the magic of compound interest, and stress and negativity of credit card debt. Now, this episode is more than 2 hours long. I thought about breaking it up into two parts, but frankly, this long form format just makes sense. And I'm also hoping that this episode can serve as a supplement for teachers. Travis and I are both lighting designers, so that's a heavy part of the discussion. But what we discuss applies to all theater design disciplines, things like per diem and negotiating rates. So if you are a student listening to this, feel free to jump to about minute 20, where we start talking about Travis's career and the business side of things. If you're an educator and you want to bring the business side of theater design into your classroom, visit the Patreon page of this episode. It includes a slideshow that has the visual of compound interest and links to the living document of artistic finance resources. It also includes a homework assignment for students and a guest lecture outline that you can use if you want to replicate our conversation with a working professional. In the name of academia, all of these things are provided for free. The only thing I ask of you is that you keep the Artistic Finance logo intact when you use these materials. And you can find that Patreon link at artisticfinance.com/175. You do have to input your email address on the Patreon, which puts you into a free membership tier, but feel free to unsubscribe anytime after you download the materials. And before we get started, a couple of vocabulary words that Travis throws out during the discussion. You might know these, but I didn't, and they're not important to the conversation, but I'm just sharing because I know now. Austerity. There is an economic definition for government budget balancing, but Travis uses the definition to describe a way of life with few or no luxuries. Lingua franca, a language that is adopted as common language between speakers whose native languages are different. And today is the last day of LDI. If you happen to hear this before 11 a.m. on Monday, swing by the podcast studio for a live recording. Without further ado, let's get to the show.
You are listening to Artistic Finance, where we help creatives learn about the business of show business.
Welcome and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Ethan Steimel. We are recording this September 17th, 2024, though we're broadcasting this December 9th, which means that LDI is happening as we speak. We recorded our live at LDI panel show yesterday, and today I welcome lighting designer Travis McHale. He's a lighting designer based in New York, and he's working in the regions and on cruise ships and all over the place. We met actually via David Lander, Travis, when you had an office down the hall from him at the Helen Hayes Theater back in 2013 or so, somewhere around there. Travis, what else should we know about you?
Well, I'm 40 years old. I'm male, identified, married, and we are a DINK household.
Nice.
And we live in the Hudson Valley, New York, and no longer in New York City. I did about 16 years living in the city, and then in the pandemic, like so many, officially pulled the plug and left. Though we're eminently commutable and can be within a couple hours when the time is there.
And I'm sure everybody knows what DINK household is, but could you say it just because I'm no longer a DINK household?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you're not. Dual income, no kids.
My father used to say that to us because I'm one of 9. I have 8 siblings. I'm not saying he was grumpy about it, but he would always, say it with what I felt was disdain to me and Nicole, like, you guys are dinks.
Well, not no more.
Yeah. So thank you for that. Creative personality here. What is a live event that you like to experience as an audience member, or what is a piece of art that you like?
As a contrarian here, I don't go to actually many live theatrical events because that's my day job. And it's kind of like the cobbler's son with no shoes. It's the lighting designer who doesn't see shows except his own. My husband was a Tony voter for many years through his job. And so we saw, I got to see anything on Broadway I wanted in that time. I got dibs on his +1 tickets, except Hello Dolly, and that's still a sore subject to this day. But anyhow, but the live events I do go to are drag shows, and I just find it to be a form of so much joy. And I love whether it's in a bar or whether it's a fully theatrical version, some of which I've worked on. That's kind of where I find myself going to get my live kicks.
I've only ever been to them, like, I guess in bars where you can go and come. Do they exist in that you go and sit down and like watch the whole hour or two?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the day and age where RuPaul's Drag Race has become pop culture, like almost baseline at this point, a lot of the known personalities who come from that do theatrical touring, and arena touring even, which I've never gone to one of those. But yeah, sometimes fully scripted, almost a play, which for better or for worse, some are superior to others. But I mean, I just love going to the bar and having kind of like the live banter and hosting experience of all that. That's something that we don't get on a theater stage very often.
All right, your financial personality, are you good or bad or neutral with money?
I was bad, and now I think I'm better. Yeah, coming with age, I guess.
Also, something we should mention is that you have a side gig as a lighting professor at SUNY New Paltz.
Yeah, maybe less of a side gig now and more of the primary gig, or a 50-50 gig. After several years of being an adjunct, I am full-time and fully committed now for 3 years. So what's great is I've got the blessing of our dean and our department to really build our BA program up from kind of a new point of view. And I came out of a BFA undergraduate world and never got a master's degree. So outside of that difficulty of academia, I'm learning what a BA is about and how to bring students who didn't, like me at 15 when I was auditioning or interviewing for conservatory programs, know that I wanted to be a lighting designer with my life. So how to bring new people into the fold and expose them to the beauty of our craft. And then to prepare those who are really driven for getting out there into New York City, which is just down the road.
Well, congrats on going full time. And
yeah,
also, I have to give like a thank you and a shout out to you, because when I taught a visiting year at Arizona State University, I asked you for help. I was like, hey, you're an academic. Can you help me? And you sent me all these materials. And I have to get a future shout out to your book, because you sent some chapters of a book you're working on. Like, I don't know how serious you are about it.
You have put it into the ether in the world, as have I, verbally to people. But okay, so you've thrown down the gauntlet. Now I have to.
Yeah, no, because you have like it's organized, and you have great visuals, and you explain everything so well, and it's comprehensive. And anyway, I was like so disgruntled that you didn't have the book yet, because I was like, there are a lot of lighting books out there, and some of them are good, but a lot of them are dated.
You know, there's a lot of great text out there, but they're text. They're all words. And I really want to work on, well, this kind of sprung out of preparing materials for class. And I was kind of, in my first semester, pushed to not require a $70 textbook for someone who might be taking lighting who will never touch it again or think about it again, partly because of the economics of our students on this campus in particular. When a student would miss class, or I had nothing to like go read chapter 8 and you'll be caught up. So I started preparing materials and realizing that there was something in the way I was doing it that I'd love to share in a broader way. So it would be a very visual book. I've done a ton of 3D renderings from Licos to entire theaters to lighting systems to, so that's the goal, is to kind of do a visual version. Like The Way Things Work was like the books I was obsessed with as a kid were the Macmillan Visual Dictionary, The Way Things Work, the DK Eyewitness books, which are, those are pretty juvenile, but the layout is still really kind of stuck in my mind of images with arrows and leaders tearing apart every part of what you're looking at, and then a paragraph if you're so inclined to read on that.
After you've
Yeah.
looked at the pictures and the diagrams for so long, you tend to be inclined to read that paragraph, actually.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about this yesterday. You did not prompt me to talk about this, but I am wanting to get the contract signed, because actually Ann McMills, I don't know if you've ever talked to her on the podcast.
Not on the podcast.
Who wrote the Assistant Lighting Designers Toolkit, so kindly hooked me up with her publisher. And a couple of years ago, I did have some conversations. And then the world turned back on, and my theater career, my lighting career re-exploded, less in theater, more in other avenues. So I kind of let that conversation fizzle. So time to reignite that. But if I sign a contract, it's 18 months to have the draft edited and at them. So I'm good on deadlines. We're theater people.
Yeah. I mean, I just think if I had your complete book, like that would have been my textbook. And actually in the show notes, I'm going to put a list, because I know some people have recommended books, because I was lamenting to other professors about like, I don't have a good text. Like I'm because what I did, and I think this is illegal, and all the lighting designers that have written books that are listening are going to be mad at me for a second, but I was also encouraged not to necessarily require an expensive textbook. And so I would scan like chapters of different books and sort of like email it out to the students, which I feel guilty about, but also.
Yep. But that's all.
Yeah. but I think the books are valuable. And also, like, there are students who are going to be there all 4 years, and those ones should buy like I did this a number of times in my class, was like, okay, here's the, why am I blanking on that template? The field template.
Oh, the field template. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say like, okay, we're going to do this hand drafting sample, because no one needs to learn Vectorworks right now. But you're never going to do this ever again. So you do not need to buy this. You can borrow it from me, or you can create your own. And I was like, unless you're a lighting student, in which case you should purchase it. So I did that a number of times with like the lighting students. I was like, you guys invest in this. Mm-hmm. Or here's the book that you guys should consider getting.
I'd say, just to bring it round of talking about financials, no one's going to get rich by writing a textbook, I have to say. And that's what was initially also something that dissuaded me from trying to commit to what would be a very long process of getting this thing completely together in a book length format. Is I always thought, wouldn't it be great to have mailbox money of some kind? You know, if you do have a long running Broadway show, you know, certain designers make $1 million a year on a Broadway show that's just up and running.
They won't admit that when they're on the show, but
no. But so I was like, I could write a book, and I'd, sell dozens of copies a year to 4 colleges and make tons of money in my mailbox. And the answer is no. The answer is like the advance is somewhere around a LART D or LART C design. And then you get like 5 cents a copy. So I kind of reassessed later and thought, wouldn't it be cool to be someone that, like, I don't know, I've kind of let my Broadway aspirations go. I'd still love a show at some point in my career, but fame was never the goal in being a lighting designer. But someday to meet someone, they're like, you wrote that book. I was obsessed with that in high school, just like I was obsessed with some horrible spiral bound thing that came off of a Xerox machine with like images of lights drawn in Corel paint or something from the 80s and 90s, and like the textbooks I could get my hands on from the 70s that were talking about carbon arc follow spots and like pretty experimental rolling on the floor theater. So for the future little me's out there, I think it'd be pretty cool to leave something behind.
Well, I think you would do a great job, and I'm looking forward to it. And I will purchase one, even though I'm not in academia anymore. Amazing. Okay, so let's talk finances, because I brought up the fact that you were a teacher because you have me come into one of your classes, like a professional development class, and we have a seminar, and we talk finances and being organized on the business side of stuff. So that's basically what this episode is. It's sort of that class, but we're just lacking the students. But I'm going to be the professor, so we're going to switch it on you, and you can be the professional designer that's sharing your insights.
I have to say real quick, teaching a class we call it senior seminar, and there's a section for performers, and I teach the section for design and tech students. And this was not on my to-do list. It was not on my goals list of like, I'm going to go teach, and then I'm going to bore 21-year-olds for 3 hours a week about taxes and portfolios and budgeting and retirement. Great. What you want to talk about when you're 21 is retirement, but actually you should be. this is my third year teaching it, and I'm kind of finally in a groove with it and really actually enjoying having a big group this year, and
Nice.
also getting to bring all my friends in to talk about their journeys in theater and life.
Yeah, amazing. All right, a couple things I actually just want to ask you right off the bat, because I'm going to go through all the questions I normally ask people, but there's a couple that topics that you had talked about in classes that we've done, and I want to ask you about them.
Sure.
So one of those topics is mortgages.
Yeah, and as you say, we're not financial professionals. We made the decision early. We don't have a very high mortgage, to pay a little extra every month. And what happens in that is you pay straight to the principal and not the interest. So you're actually lowering the financial burden, not just by the $100 extra or 100 or 200 that we put in every month, which kind of more or less works out to a payment or two. And that makes me think of your Greg Barnes episode. He was talking about, God, I'm such a fanboy, about like writing one extra payment for his, I forget whether it was a car or a mortgage or something every year. By the way, the bank sent the statements. So for us, just this $100 extra a month saves 9 or 10 years on a 30-year mortgage. And I think really serious, like investor people say, don't do that, because a mortgage is good debt. $100 could go somewhere else and make more money for you than saving some interest. But I don't know. It saves $1,000 of interest by saving 9 years on a mortgage. Then I'm here for that.
That's one of those things that I'm always like, there is no wrong decision. It's like, don't pay it off early. Good decision. Pay it off early. Good decision. Because it's like, logically, I understand, I can follow that train of thought of like, oh, if you go and invest the money and make more this way, then that $13,000 in interest that you're saving could have been $30,000 that you made, and then you would just have half of it to pay off the mortgage. I do understand that, but also maybe it's the freelancer, unreliable income background that it's the security of like paying off the home. And then it's like, if an emergency happens, this rarely happens, I don't think, but like if an emergency happens and you have to sell the place, like you own it fully, so you're going to get all that money back, versus if you still have half the mortgage left.
That's really interesting, because I feel like so much of my financial, I don't want to say outlook or theory, because I don't have one, but just the way I move through the world and money is colored by being a freelancer for so much of my career. And only now is what I'm making as a teacher more than a drop in the bucket. And so now that's my reliable, steady. I know that's always there, so I don't have to worry as much, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I've been at this, I graduated school 19 years ago. So many years of austerity have kind of really shaded, I think, how I move through the world.
Okay, another thing you talked about, and I actually thought we had talked about this on the show before, but apparently not. I think it was from you, was talking about diaper money, putting that into a savings account. So can you explain this?
Something I'm never going to have to grapple with, unless the cat gets needs Depends at some point. But no, my parents, I have some pretty good financial role models as parents. And one thing they did for a year when I grew out of, I guess, got potty trained and grew out of using diapers, was they kept putting that money, which I cannot tell you what a diaper costs, other than I think it's probably pretty exorbitant these days.
$75 a month is a fair amount right now.
I kind of expected it would be more. Not to say that.
Well,
that's
okay.
not.
Sorry, I'm just okay. Let me. It could be double that, because here's the deal. I'm only going off. I went to the store yesterday, and I bought overnight diapers and then regular diapers. I suspect those could last 4 weeks, but maybe 3, maybe 2.5, 3 anyway. But it was $75. They were the first things I checked out, like in the self-checkout kiosk. So that's why I'm going $75. So
there you go. Okay.
Somewhere between $75 and $150 a month.
Wow. So that's not nothing. So they saved that money every month for a year after I didn't need them anymore, and put that in an account. And then they gave it to me when I was 16, and I was able to buy a car. So I don't know what investment tool they used, if it was just a savings account, and in the 80s savings account probably actually did something, or if they got a CD or something like that, which was popular. I forget how much it was in that account for me at the end, but it paid for a used car for a teenager. I wanted to take flying lessons too, but I thought a car living in Los Angeles was more useful. And maybe if I took those flying lessons, I wouldn't be a lighting designer today, because that was always the fallback.
I mean, that actually checks out, I feel like, with $75 a month. Was it like a $15,000 car? Do you remember what kind
Oh
of
no,
car
it was
it
like
was?
$5,000 car.
Oh, 5,000. Oh, yeah, yeah, that totally. So, because I assume you
Yeah,
were out of diapers. I don't know. I have a kid. I don't know when he's going to be out of diapers, but let's say four.
yeah,
So 4 to 16, that's 12 years. So 12 years. Yeah, I think even less. They're paying
yeah.
less for diapers back then. What the heck?
And that's how I got my
Amazing.
'97 Ford Ranger. So
Okay. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. Because in a couple years, Theo will be out of diapers, and I'll have to try to remember this. Because every time I go to the grocery store, I'm like, I have a siblings chat with some of my siblings, and one of them's like, I spent $150 this week on groceries. How did I do that? I can't get under 150. And I'm over there being like, it's 300. I can't get under 300.
oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, so now let's go back and talk about you before you started your career. We learned about the diaper thing, but growing up, did you have a good financial example?
I did. My parents were small business owners. My dad was a printer and started his company in his 20s. And at some point pretty early in their marriage, my mom started working and becoming the manager and bookkeeper for the company, or started working there and left her job out in the other part of the world. She was a draftsman, by the way. And so I think that's where my love of drafting came from. So as small business owners, like I would work for them. I'd actually punch a clock as a little kid to take out trash and answer phones and things like that. I would run payroll with mom using the adding machine. This is pre-computer. Watching her do deposits, and so I kind of had an understanding of the mechanics of at least business, a small business's finances and filing and all that stuff. So I kind of really had a fascination around it. They were successful enough in their business that there was never really a discussion of, I can remember any financial difficulties in my childhood. We weren't living high on the hog by any stretch, but I think they were smart, and like it was the '80s. They weren't buying a Beamer like all my friends' yuppie parents were, etc. So we went out to restaurants. That was like the splurge and the thing that we like to do, and which I continue to this day, and will be the end of any money I ever earn.
That's awesome. I mean, one, that you had a business owner parent, because even if it's a small business or even an unsuccessful business, they're forced, or if they're not good at business, like they're still forced to do all the things that businesses are required, which of course is all things that freelancers are required to do. And I also love that you did the spreadsheets. I'm thinking now back on my childhood, and I'm like, never once did I ever want to sit in front of a computer or in front of a bunch of papers. Like it never crossed my, like there's this thing that like there's financial advice out there from Warren Buffett and all these smart people. And it's like, even if you don't have a lot of money, if you know how to manage it, you're going to be fine. And I feel like it would have been so beneficial if, as a young person, I had like seen somebody, because I actually, funny, I worked at an embossing shop, which is not a printing
Oh,
shop,
fun.
but
Yeah.
it's similar idea basically. And I remember I would work back like folding the folders and putting the glue on the boxes and the paper. But then there was somebody up front who was doing all the payroll. And never once did I even think about like sitting down and asking a question or whatever. I just would like walk by them on the way in and out. All right.
Well, my
How do
dad
I?
very explicitly did not teach me how to run a printing press or do any of the stuff out in the shop, because he did not want me to be a printer, which, there's worse things in the world. But by the time I went out into the world, digital technology had moved on, and their desktop publishing and xerography was more of the lingua franca. And so like commercial printing really is more of a niche thing nowadays.
Yeah. That's amazing. Oh, yeah. Good for your dad not letting you.
Yeah.
That's funny. Theo's not learning how to turn on light switches. I won't let him.
Good.
Amazing. All right. So it sounds like you were set up for your career in a smart way, a wise way. I don't know. But what did your finances look like when you started as a lighting designer?
And there's where my relationship with money fell apart, because my finances were crap. I moved to New York straight out of school. I think I had $3,000 in my pocket from graduation gifts. I was thinking back that like for the first 5 or so years, I made like $24,000 a year. But I worked in the industry. I never had to take an outside job, and I lived a little New York City life, and that was fun. But I think what that started was the fear and the sense that money brought stress, or the lack thereof. But anyway, just the general concept of dealing with money brought stress. So I didn't think about it anymore. I didn't like thinking about it. Often, if I did, it was because rent was coming due and the bank account was bone dry. So it started this negative cycle of money. And I had, like, not only with my parents' business, but I was this, student council treasurer in high school. I loved saving as a kid. I'm a nerd. I would like buy lighting equipment in high school and then rent it out. And then I sold it when I graduated. And this continues to this day, unfortunately. So, but I would like save my allowance money and like the money I got from working in my parents' shop in a cash box with like, the little individual springs. And I would count it at night like a miserly little child. And then I'd go like buy one Altman 360 Q6x9 or something from a used lighting shop. So I loved savings. I loved dealing with, student council money, and then college and life hit, and it became a negative in my life. And it started a cycle of credit card debt.
Ugh. Credit card debt, that horrible thing that has popped up on this show way too many times than I'd like to admit. So now you've said you're better with money. Like, now do you think about money? Do you worry about money? Yeah.
I mean, the shift, to be blunt, is I make a good deal of money now, sometimes, some years, that I think primarily that my main income stream is no longer live theater, but it's working in commercial projects like cruise ships and touring concerts. And that's a very different financial workflow or revenue stream. And it kind of allows me to keep my regional theater habit, which is alive and strong.
You got to break that.
I love it. I just opened a show 2 nights ago after coming off of a cruise ship for 5 days that paid 4 times as much. So just by virtue of earning more as I'm 20 years into my career, and having some savings, and for the first time paying off that credit card debt at 39 years old. So that was a 20-year cycle of just maxing cards, and has made me just be able to breathe and start to think about it in ways that like, how can this money start working for me?
I'm so happy you're saying that because one, younger people don't necessarily listen to this show. Well, it depends on what age you are, what younger is. But let's say sub 20 people don't listen to the show. But this is why it's so important for people to join the union early, for people to think about their finances early, because you're like, well, I'm better now because I make more money. and this goes back to compounding. It's like, if you start off not making a lot, then no matter how much you save, et cetera, like, it can only scale up so much. And there is a reality here of you have to make more money in order to be better off. Yeah. So you actually said it rather bluntly, which is like, we make more money. So that's why it's important that younger people not figure it out, but it's like, it's important not to just say, oh, I'm young and I can do this, or there's that what I call theater reality of theater doesn't pay much. Like, yes, Broadway or yes, the Met, sure, but like, those are usually not happening early on. And so,
and it's a vanishingly small amount of people who work in those fields with any regularity. On the design side, on the assistant side, you can set that as a goal, but for me, that came my first show assisting on Broadway was with David Lander, and I did 3 shows with him, and that was like 2012. So I was almost a decade into my career at that point. I was already in the union, luckily, but in the end, and this is a bone I have with, and why I don't assist on Broadway anymore, is Broadway associates, even the top of the line, who can negotiate very high percentage wise above union scale, is I feel vastly underpaid for working at the very pinnacle of our industry in this country, and in a VP role. If you were to put this into a corporate structure, it's a nice weekly fee, but it's not a yearly job. It's a 10-week job. or a 15-week job on a musical. So at the end of the day, I feel like for a person that could grind the entire $10 million production to a halt in the bat of an eyelash, it's not well enough paid for me to go through the stress. And I was never the best associate. I'll just say it. I think I was competent and enough to do it 12 times, but for me, it was kind of a means to learning the industry, to stepping into earning a little more money doing what I did. And then I went back to being my own designer.
That's hilarious to say that, because I say that all the time. I'm like, there are certain designers I work with, and it's only because the personality matches. It's not, unfortunately, because of my lighting skills as an associate. Like, I've always said
being an associate, I can't speak to other departments. And so unfortunately, this is just kind of lighting centric. I think the main job is to let the designer go be the artist who sets a level, makes the look, has the conversation with the director, does the politics of dealing with the producers and all the egos in the room, and doesn't have to think about wattages and numbers and photometrics and work notes. And so that was always my approach. And I was never the most technocratic of assistants.
Yep.
But the shows always got open.
The shows happened, and some of them were really big ones. So did you say you're 40?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's going to come into play later on. I'm very proud of myself right now. We may have just answered this next question, which is, do you have any debts, student loan, medical, credit card, mortgage, etc.?
So credit cards, no, at the moment, Wesley. And I was like, had a good year. I was able to pay off my husband's as well. So we're styling. If you listen back into the archives, I was on your EV panel. And at that point, when we recorded, my EV was a mere glimmer in my eye. But now I've had it for a year. So, I do have that loan. So I've got 4 years left on that. And we lease our other car, and the mortgage.
Okay. The car, this is way throwback. Yeah. There was some tax benefit that you were going with because it was so did that all work out for you accounting?
It did. So yeah, it was my grand scheme of having, I had been on the list I got a Ford Lightning pickup truck, which is so cool. But I'd been on the list for 2 years. I signed up the day they announced it was $100 for fundable if you want to get off the list. And it took 2.5 years to get it. But it just so happened that when my number came up and also the cost of the truck was doubled what I wanted to pay for it, I was having a good year and I was looking at a really big tax burden. So it qualified for the maximum federal tax rebate or credit. Yeah, it was a tax credit of $7,500 right off the top of your tax bill. If you didn't owe $7,500, you got whatever. It went up to that limit. You didn't get an extra $2,000 mailed to you. So you got that. And then that particular truck, and when I pieced this all together, I was just jumping for joy, weighs over 6,000 pounds, which qualifies it. This is why rich people buy G-Wagons, is it qualifies it as a piece of industrial machinery, and therefore you can depreciate it over 1 year. Otherwise, the car depreciates over 5. So on my big earning year, which is a kind of a once in a career thing, to be frank, I was able to write off a large percentage of the truck that I use for work at just a lump sum. And so in the end, my like napkin math saved me about $30,000 in taxes. Now I'll say that I spent $30,000 more on the truck than I ever would pay for a car in my mind. Like I'm not one who needs a Mercedes. I like something like clean and nice and simple. And so there's the trade-off, but at the end of the day, I get a cool car and the money didn't go to the government. And I'm not anti-tax. Like, please, we all have to do our part in our society.
Well, the government sees the future of EVs and they want people to be buying them, and you're helping them do that.
Role model.
Okay. Also, have you ever used a budget?
No.
Okay.
I've always kind of had this uncanny, sometimes it has gotten me in trouble, but like kind of just understanding of where I stand and can kind of like, I can tabulate the shopping cart within $5 usually every time at the grocery store, which is my secret skill.
Nice.
So it's kind of that, like, I always knew where the account stood, even if I wasn't looking every day. I kind of understood loosely how much I needed by the end of the month, etc. It did get me in trouble when I was being young and doing theater for $500 a gig and not sleeping and things like that. So yeah, I know. And as part of my class, we do a little budgeting project. I make them select a city in which to live, do a little research on what housing prices are. I've just never, I don't know, it didn't compute with me. I kind of just did it in my head. And I said this to a stage manager friend who was staying with me recently, and he was working on his personal budget because he got a new job, and it was intense, let's say. And we just had this conversation. He's like, "What? You've never done that?" I couldn't function without it. So I think it's maybe more of a personality thing than and I think as a freelancer, it's kind of an exercise in frustration and futility at points because you're not topping it up. If you know that you have a steady gig that's 9 to 5, or even if it's an institutional theater and you know that the check every other week is going to come in for $2,000, then bully, let's go budget. And I've got friends who do that, who started out as stage managers also, who've shared their budgets with me for class. It just to a level of how much is savings for each of the kids' college and like intense stuff. But hey, it's how they can get.
Yeah, I'm not organized. I don't budget. Now I'm thinking for Theo. Oh shoot.
Well, this is what I love these conversations, and this is why I think your podcast is spectacular. Is because I don't know, there's not a lot of community, especially between people who work in the same discipline in our industry. There's one lighting designer per show. There's one costume designer, and so we're not all meeting as groups, which is why the union's committees are good. But the committees are working towards things, not socializing, kind of sorting through their personal life. So with you having people expose their soft underbellies, because I don't think anybody in the arts is inherently comfortable with money. It's just helpful, hearing how other people work.
That's a good point, because I'm now forgetting that I've now talked to so many lighting designers on this show, whereas like before, if I worked for like Peter Kazarowski or Jan Bersiveld, like I would work with those two designers in 1 year, and then I would work with maybe an assistant or two, and then like production electricians and lighting people that weren't designers. Even though doing lighting full time, I would probably work with less than 50 lighting people in 1 year, and certainly not talk with them about any of these topics. But it is sort of amazing. Because of this, I've now talked to so many, and they're all on the record too, so everyone can go back and listen. But it's like, but it's right. There's a community of like seeing that we're all different, but all the same.
Yeah.
Okay. What is a really good financial thing that you've done for yourself that other people could learn from?
We've already talked about how I own my home. For me, it was buying a house. Not any of us can just go out tomorrow and buy a house. It doesn't work that way, and the market's messed up right now. But maybe through sheer naivete, we stumbled into what we have. We, in our mind, buying a 500 square foot apartment in New York City for $500,000, and then having a $1,400 HOA on top of your mortgage just didn't work numbers wise for us, or logic wise. Anyone who's spent any number of years living in New York knows that you have to get out of New York. So we started looking upstate and like little towns that we love to go visit on weekends and go buy candy in the little candy store and ice cream and stay in the B&B and all that stuff, just as little getaways. We watched the house that we ended up buying come on and off the market for about a year until we actually had the money. My husband actually inherited some money, and that was what made us be able to do it. We were saving for a down payment, but all of a sudden everything aligned. We had a little cash for a down payment, and this little cottage in the woods showed up again at a lower price. And it was very low, but for a very good reason. It was a total fixer, and it's very small. Like I watch nieces and nephews and people who aren't theater industry people going and buying their first houses. They go for the newish build, 4-bedroom, perfectly Magnolia, Chip and Joanna Gaines HGTV house, and they pay an ass ton of money, even in mid-sized cities, for this. And we somehow, as New Yorkers, were comfortable with 800 square feet, which is double what our apartment was. And then you plus the natural world that's out the back door. And yeah, not the forever house. You're like, that's small. Glad I have an office at school now, to be frank. But that plus it was like stinky and mildew, full of cobwebs and all of the horror stories of a fixer-upper. But we were able to do a lot of that work ourselves because we're crafty theater people. And like, I built scenery for a long time in one phase of my career. So I did the interior work myself, and a friend helped me paint the exterior, and who's a scenic painter in COVID and things like that. We did some yard work and rebuilt a dry stack rock wall. So we put in some sweat equity, and just on paper, the house has triple its value in 6 years. And then beyond that is, I'm sure we could squeak out more because we've done a lot of actual improvements to it beyond just the comps and the square footage and stuff like that. So to not get trapped in the thought that the house has to be perfect when you move in on day one, because it's not going to be, and it's a lifelong, you're going to keep working on it. I watch my parents who owned the house since the 70s keep working, keep pouring money. So it's a living investment. So that's kept the cost of living low. And I know that's a running theme that a lot of people say when they go, what's the best thing that you've done? Like, the mortgage is like $800 a month, and that includes taxes and insurance. And I feel really guilty saying that because it's like, I paid like the last apartment I had was $2,000 a month. So
no, but I think I feel like everybody listening is actually happy that you got this place and you're living in a place. You've worked it into your life. You made that choice. You went out there and did it. You have a long commute to the city. You waited a long time. You got a fixer-upper. I think everybody's just happy for you because it's such a such a part of your life, and where you live is important.
It's not for everyone there. But I do wake up and there's the bunnies and the deer in the yard. I'm Snow White all of a sudden, and it's no longer. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about New York. I really had a great time there. I just don't. I'm over it. So
no, I understand. I understand. New York's dirty. Living in the city or out of the city, it's just different. Because we purchased a home 3 months ago.
Oh, good.
So we're now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so like it's a whole life. Like Theo was a life-changing thing, right? Having a kid. Also buying a house is like it's just so different. But I was forced. So we have an HOA. I swore I didn't want one, but it just worked out that we have one. And so I was forced to weed all around the house. But anyway, so now I'm like into gardening.
That's amazing. I'm building my husband's grounds. That's the rules. But yet oddly, I'm the one out weeding right now. But because I have a personal vendetta against a certain, I don't know, we're in the forest, so it's not like manicured lawns or anything. But I have a vendetta against some certain weeds under some certain trees.
That's hilarious. Well, because like when we were in the city, I was like, and when we bought a house, I was like, I don't want a yard, or I want the smallest yard possible. Like I don't want any. And instead it's a small yard, but it's still like 1,000 times bigger than I wanted. Like I wanted 0. When we lived in New York for 10 years and also an apartment in Phoenix, never did I imagine doing yard work at all. But here we are.
There's something that oddly about owning a home, something like raking leaves, shoveling snow, doing those chores don't feel chore. It's just like, oh, got to go do this now, which I imagine that's how like changing the kid is to continue our diaper theme here. It's just like, it's got to be done. So you're not going to bitch and moan about it. Sometimes shoveling snow is really actually pleasant.
Yeah, it's pleasant. It's pleasant. Gets your blood moving. Okay. You don't have to answer this one because we've talked about credit card debt and stuff, but what is a bad financial thing you've done that other people could avoid?
That was absolutely the worst. It was just getting in that cycle early and then like getting enticed into taking one of those like debt consolidation cards and then not closing the other account or spending up the other card. And then it's just doubled all of a sudden. So like I went through the pitfalls of that, of just trying to be a poor person in the arts and make it. But I did have a couple of times that, and this was my loose back of the napkin accounting methodology was terrible, is twice I got into this thing. Like once when I was moving to the city and like scatterbrained, and another time when I was working on a show, I gave all the cares in the world about the account overdrafted. And it was Bank of America and Chase, both these let me keep swiping a debit card and racking up the $30 fee and the whatever $5 purchase. Like one of them, I went from having no money to minus 600 very fast. And that was everything to me when I was 25 or whatever. I would literally just go out on a meal break and go to a 7-Eleven and get some roller food and go back and start painting scenery or hanging lights, and did that for a week. So I was swiping $5 at 7-Eleven on 8th Avenue 3 times a day. And each of those taquitos was costing me like $40. I was in tears talking to Chase Bank, and they're like, I was like, why didn't you turn it off? Obviously there's a problem. They said 7-Eleven is a gas station, not in Manhattan. And that's considered an essential service, so we don't turn it off. I mean, it was stupid. If it had declined, then the hot dog goes back in the case. And I would have like gone and pulled money out of savings or begged some friend for $50 to get me through the week until the show opened or something. So there were 2 times where that happened for about like a negative $500 approach. And, you know, that was just hideous and a stupid mistake. And I still kick myself for it. It's like, there's no need to put yourself in that stress, but I was painting scenery, damn it. Yeah.
That is frustrating. Really, especially because it's a debit card. Because one thing, I know credit card debt is bad, but something I've always done, just because of how my brain works, I've always used a credit card because I've thought like it at least lets you know what the amount's going to be so that you have time to pay it. I've historically used credit cards like a debit card in the sense of like, I have to have the money in my account in order for me psychologically to go do it, to use that money. And like, if I don't have the money, I'm not going to put it on the credit card. But I just do the credit part of it just in case something like that happens.
And now I've kind of reverted to using credit all the time now that I can just zero it out every month. Now that there's no balance left.
Okay. The question is, how do you get jobs and find work?
I think I've got the standard answer that a lot of working people give to you, and it's word of mouth. But I seldom solicit work. I seldom put myself out there, and it's kind of been that way from the beginning. Though I can trace like how the connections were made back to a couple roots. And then I guess I don't screw up enough that I keep getting calls.
I actually made a chart when I was going into academia because I had like a class on collaboration, and I actually hadn't made a chart for my whole career.
That's really like, brilliant.
Ding, ding, ding. Because like it literally, like I can credit my friend Taylor Ferreira from Summerstock in 2009 for almost all of my line design work. I should tell Taylor this. Anyway, I'm gonna share that. Maybe I'll share that in the show notes or something.
That's amazing, because I've thought about that, and I can think back to like 2 things in my career two choices, and one was academic. I went to North School of the Arts, as it was called back then. Now it's UNC School of the Arts. I can attribute all of my Broadway work to the connections that the alumni network that came out of there. Just random story is I was out working for an alumni who was a production manager for a dance company, moving painted masonite out of a hideous warehouse on the Westside Highway into a truck, into a 12th floor storage unit in Brooklyn. But so was Craig Stelzenmuller, who's like Broadway's most working associate LD right now, and had never met. He was like at least like a school generation older than I was. And so we had a subway ride together to Brooklyn to go move masonite for $50 or whatever, exchanged information. And it was within that year that he got me on a show with Ken Billington. He gave me to David Lander. He gave me to Natasha Katz. I'm in debt. We've never talked about it again, but I'm indebted to him for all my commercial New York theater work. So that was one avenue. And then the other was I did an internship at Weston Playhouse Theater Company, which was a classic $100 a week plus housing kind of summer gig. And the connections I made there are literally every other design I've ever done in my career, including cruise ships, came out of that through a network of regional theater meeting directors who got shows and taking me along. And that network sprung out of doing regional theater or D theater.
Yeah, that's the classic work begets work. So you just have to do it. And what Carolyn Wong was saying on now a few months ago episode, but a recent episode was that it's better to be in a theater than not in a theater.
Yeah.
So got to get out there, be seen. Okay, so my follow-up question was actually going to be, how did you get your first job? But I was going to change that to how did you get your first assisting or associate job on Broadway? And I think you just answered that was
Yeah.
Craig Stelzenmuller.
Yeah. And with David, he gave me to David, or connected us, not gave me to like,
Here, David, here is Travis.
Connected us, and I interviewed with David, and we looked at drafting paperwork and all that. And he put me on some off-Broadway shows. And when he got his next Broadway gig, brought me along for the ride, as I think his long-standing associate moved to LA or something like that. If I'm remembering back a decade or so. I have to say, David Lander is one of the best lighting designers I've ever met in the world. Like, if you need someone to light a play, and specifically, because that's what we did together, not selling my shelf short, but call David Lander and Ethan and Travis.
Yeah. But David, he gets into the minutia. I think him and Corey are two of the people that get into the minutia more so than any other designers I know. All right. So, well, I have this question, which is, how did you get your latest job?
Yeah, well, I find one way that lighting designers often get jobs is via connection of the set designer, of all people, almost more so than directors, or that's been in my experience.
We just did an episode with agents and designers together, and we had Cookie Jordan, who's wig designer, and her agent Russ Rosenzweig. And Russ was saying basically, like, costume designer is always the one that brings the wig designer in, and same thing for set and lighting. And Russ was just saying, it's really weird when the lighting designer is hired before the set designer. Like, that's just, it sort of throws up my flags. Like, what I got to get to the bottom of this. Why is this happening? Yeah. And same thing if they hire Cookie for wigs before they hire a costume designer. It's like, why is that? So anyway, that's just reinforcing your point that, yes.
I don't know Russ, but if I were to have an agent, and I would go to Russ. Oh, so my latest job, at what phase in the project is my next job? I don't know. I've got a few before this, but next year I'm doing a show in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and the set designer brought me in. And that's a new connection for me. It's going to be Mean Girls, or it's, I'll butcher it in Portuguese, but it's Las Meninas Maldavas, I think. So that's like my next big theater thing, though I do have an upcoming Rocky Horror at Bucks County Playhouse. I've done this our 8th year, and it's my favorite gig. It's annual at this point. Hunter Foster directs it, and we created it out of nothing in 2013, and now we're in like a version 2.0 full reimagining of it with Frankie Grande plays our Frankenfurter, who's Ariana Grande's brother, and it's just delightful. So back in the day, I did a full summer season for them, and it must have been someone gave the name. How else would it have been? So and did a full summer season for them, and I've been working for them for 11 years.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Which job of yours has been the most well compensated?
Definitely designing in the cruise world. Like one cruise line I work for, I design the light plot, the lighting rig, all of the ancillary electric stuff. I project manage the install. I hire my team. I program the show, and design shows. So those cumulatively are very big jobs, but that's me as a company, not me as an LD. So on other cruise lines I work for, whether I'm just designing or designing and programming, on a day rate, that's Broadway scale programmer rates and beyond.
Great. Wait, so when you're an LD, you're on a day rate for cruises?
Every line kind of does it differently, but that industry processes in day rate. It's very hard for a straight up theater person to understand that, because we're so fee based.
But I think it's good. I know, actually, I think it's good to figure out day rate, because even if you're in theater, because and this is on my mind because we've done pay negotiation episodes that are going to be coming out. One of the questions that's always coming up from younger people is like, how do you figure out your rate? How do you figure out? And the answer is like, well, it depends on the industry, lots of things. But one thing that I find that helps me is like figure out a day rate. So even if it's theater, if you're in a situation where a theater show is saying, what's your fee? You look at the days on site and you break it down to like what your day rate would be. And then you could figure out your fee from there. I feel like day rates are like a super easy thing to understand. You can take hours out of the equation, because like standard day rate might be 10 hours, but let's say it's a theater 16-hour day rate, right? Well, if you break it down to a day rate, you figure I can only be abused of my time and energy for 24 hours. So
I
like,
think the one,
yes, it'd be ideal to do a 10-hour day rate, but also like I can still be like, I'd be satisfied with $400 a day on
yeah,
this random theater show or something. Yeah.
I think the one thing that never computes to me is like a lighting design is not just the days you're on site. It's as any design is. There's plenty of time in preparing it and drafting it and having meetings and just the reading of the script. So, it's, do you count all those days, or do you just say, I'm going to double my day rate because it's not just 9 days on site?
No, okay. I'm glad you brought that up because yes, everybody says line design is more than on site. And that is 100% true. We all know that. Like, if you didn't do any, like Jen Schriever brought this up once. She's like, you could do zero prep and show up and hope for the best.
And we've all done that show, or like it's an emergency gig for some reason, or everything changes and your prep's out the window. But
so
that's not a fun way to work.
But that is not like, I mean, definitely, especially if you're going to a house that has no lights, like if you show up and there are no lights, like, whoa.
Yeah.
But anyway, that being said, I find that everybody else in the world, specifically GMs, producers, and all that, think of it as days on site. Anyway, so to answer your question, which you didn't ask me for an answer for, do you double the day rate? Whatever. You just have to decide for yourself, knowing how much prep you have. But I also throw in the day rate into figuring out like how many days of prep am I going to do? And like my minimum is like 2. At least I have to include 2 days of day rate. And so I would throw that into the fee. It's not me dictating a fee. I'm never dictating a fee because there's always going to be like, we don't want to pay that much or whatever.
Right.
But that's how my rational brain works. It's like the days on site and then however many prep days.
Here's one other thing that goes into the computing of day rates. And I learned this from programmers. I come at programming as a need of a lighting designer. And so but I've programmed a whole lot now, especially because of the cruise world. And unfortunately, I'm learning Grand MA. That aside from that, but is that your travel days should be paid, which is not a concept that worked in my brain. It was like, wait a minute, but I'm not working. But the logic of the amazing programmer who taught me that he charges a full day rate for travel days, bar none, is that it's taking you out of accepting other work. So a travel day is a day out of your schedule, regardless if you're working or not. Just like, in cruise ship world, if the ship is in service, it's full of passengers. Theater is not always available. It's seldom available. And so you do a lot of back of the clock stuff, but some days it's just not a thing. It's a C day. So there's going to be programming from 9 a.m. till 2 a.m. sometimes. And so some days you don't work, but you're on a boat somewhere in the world, and that's a day that you're not working on something, able to work on something else in person. So that's a charged day. So
yes, travel days should be day rates. There are some companies that will do like a half a day rate, which is
how my mind is okay with that.
It's more than 0, but it's also like, okay, but I can't half work. And then I'm doing this show in Branson, and we were going through fee and rate, and I was like doing the day rates. And I will say I had my travel days on there, and I did cut them to like half days. I might have even cut them entirely, as it was like, how can we get to this number?
Starting high negotiating. So like put your full day rate in there. And then if someone balks at it, then that's where you cut, and you're not going to be too miffed. They're not saying, oh, you're not worth as much. They're going, oh, we just don't have this. Can you trim here?
Okay, you sort of hinted at this. Do you have an entity, corporation, LLC?
I actually don't.
Oh, okay.
I work as a just me, meaning sole proprietor. I only found out recently about something that's called a single person LLC that you can just apply for and do online. I mean, do your research, just don't go do it willy-nilly. And that doesn't change. I believe you can get an EIN, employer identification number, from that, so you don't have to use your social when you're sending out 1099s to people. What it does, it doesn't change anything about the way you file your taxes. Like an S corp, you don't pay self-employment tax for an S corp, but you do pay payroll tax and Medicare and Medicaid, and you have to give yourself a salary. And I'm not organized like that, so I like the way I do my taxes. And self-employment tax sucks. But doing the single person LLC gives you a liability buffer. It lets you do what a LLC does, and that's separate your personal finances from your business finances. So if someone got hurt and who is a contractor for me, or if I burned down the cruise ship, then I could be separated. My house wouldn't be taken away.
Yeah.
My programming wing would be taken away, but my house wouldn't be.
When you were talking about doing the cruise ship, like the big entire project, I somehow thought you actually were working through an LLC.
You should be correct in thinking that, because I'm crazy and I'm a chaos monster. If we haven't established that already, and that I was just doing that as me and hiring 3 people. I don't mean to over exaggerate, as contractors, and writing $100,000 of 1099s, just handwritten on carbon paper. I'm crazy. I'm literally insane.
No, but also I like what you're saying, because this is something I feel like I've said on the show 100 times, but maybe not, which is I opened up an LLC, a single member one that you're talking about, in New York City, because I thought I should early on. And so now I've just had it, but I've never used it for anything. Not like, maybe the accountant counts it as something, but I've never.
Do you file it as a separate tax return?
No, because a single member,
so it is. Okay, so it is.
So you do, the way you do your taxes is exactly the same. 0 changes. Nothing changes. Maybe there's a check mark somewhere that goes something, but I think you just include the EIN. But again, I'm including it every year, saying I ran 0 through this. But where I don't like it, because if I were to go back in time, I would never open it up, because I've never done anything with it. But every quarter in New York State, you have to file taxes online through it. And if you don't, it's a $50 fine. So even if you have 0 taxes, you still have to go file. And if you miss it by 2 weeks or something, so I probably spent like $400 because I've forgotten, like I've been busy or whatever. And I have I saved the email, but I never get to it. And then I get the fine the next time I file.
It's like a quarterly estimated.
Yeah. Well, and it's mostly for like sales tax, which we don't have. Yeah, exactly. But I am also not even using it. So anyway, but whereas like in Missouri, if I were to open it up, they don't have that quarterly rule. So Missouri, I could open it up and literally nothing at all would change. I wouldn't even need to start doing that filing. So that's my only statement to you, is I think how you're doing it is just fine.
I mean, the fear is that not even me, but like I hire an electrician and they wire set electrics wrong and set a leg on fire, and then here goes the high fog system in the cruise ship, and you're out millions of dollars. I mean, they couldn't collect it on me. I don't have that.
Okay. Your income, I know you're a educator sometimes. What is your W-2 versus 1099 breakdown for?
I'd say for the bulk of my career, it was 20% W-2 and 80 1099. And now it's, depending on the year, is going to be like 30 to 50%, which the Trump tax plan benefited me. I would rather it didn't exist, but it did benefit the way that me, as someone who earns money primarily 1099 but has W-2 income, it really helped. But like, go to an actor who is all W-2 but also used to itemize on their W-2, and they all got screwed and they all became S corps. And now have to file 2 tax returns and do all that stuff. Not all, they didn't. That's hyperbolic, but a lot of them had to become. And I think S corp is what, for whatever reason, over an LLC, is what allowed them to continue to itemize their work expenses.
See, because I thought the standard deduction went up.
Yes, that helped me too.
So I just assumed,
and then I still got to itemize on my Schedule C, on my 1099 income.
I guess they didn't have that. Interesting.
I mean, the standard went up, but I think a lot of actors could, itemize their audition clothes and their dance shoes and headshot. Like, all of that added up to more than a standard. I think the ones who were doing well, who made money in commercial ways, like in film and television and voiceovers, really needed to do that. We should also say in this discussion, since I'm married to a business rep at 829, is that to be on a union contract, you can only be, you have to be an employee of someone. And even so, we're temporary employees when we're 1099 and on a union and an 829 contract. So if you process all of your money through a corporation, you cannot put Ethan Stiemel Lighting Design LLC, even though this wouldn't be you, but let's say Corp, Ethan Corp, cannot be the beneficiary of the signatory of a union contract. So you have to do a thing called a loan out letter saying that you, the corporation, are loaning out Ethan to this production. And it's like this other layer of bureaucracy and rigmarole. So like, that's another thing you have to deal with. And I'm sure the agents love it. And if you don't have an agent, I'm sure you would love doing that extra paper. And I know the business reps love it too. So it becomes a different step when you're putting work on a USA contract.
Well, Sergio Trujillo, who's a choreographer director, not performer necessarily, when I was asking him questions, he was basically like, I have a business manager that deals with all of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's sort of like that. But when I talked with Don Holder recently, we didn't get into the nuts and bolts of it, but he talked about how he does everything through his, even like all the Lion King, like, even though that's union
absolutely.
money, it goes through his company. So he must do that loan out paperwork somehow. Interesting. I didn't even realize.
His manager, I'm sure, is doing the paperwork.
Yeah. Because I wondered how that works.
It can hold up your benefits. If you're a smaller person who's gone this route and agents behind on paperwork or whatever, and you don't get that signed contract and those benefits don't hit that quarter. So you could be now paying out of pocket for your health insurance in a more profound way than you normally would or would at all. It's just another layer of paperwork that is not what any of us join this industry to do. And that's like the subtitle of my class is, you had Linda Essig on, and so I've been reading her book, and I kind of subtitled this class Creative Careers, and like, bringing out your entrepreneurial spirit. And that's not why any of us started this, but it's a sad fact not a sad fact. It is just a fact of doing, of being a small business. And we all, for some portion of our careers, need to think of ourselves that way.
Stage Link podcast. I listened to a recent episode with Ulrich Storch, who's a circus performer now, business coach. That episode is so good, and I'm going to cross promote it here and put it into our feed.
Great.
She says it is irresponsible for artists to think of the business part as icky or the marketing part as icky. Mm-hmm. And it's that same thing of creative careers. It's like, it is a business, and you can't avoid it. You can't ignore. I mean, you can't ignore it. We all ignored it. You've ignored it. I've ignored it.
Yeah.
That's why we're talking today, because we ignored it at some point.
Well, let's not talk about the marketing aspect that I completely ignore.
Yeah, exactly. It's like me in social media. Like, I'm like, I can't stand it. I can't, but it's like,
you're responsible. That for me is the same issue
too. And I'm a little better on Instagram now, but like, it's irresponsible for me because it is a useful tool. And just because I get overwhelmed and all that doesn't mean I shouldn't find a way to make it work for me. Yeah. But anyway, all right, rant over. Do you pay quarterly? Because you mentioned you're now like 70, 1099 and 30.
I don't. I never have, and it's never seemed to bite me in the butt. And I've had some accountants in the past send the quarterlies for the next year with the tax return for this year. And I'm like, no. What's this for? So again, I'm chaotic, and I don't know, like I've never been dinged for owing at the end of the year. I've never owed so much that I am to pay interest, which I think is what filing a quarterly is about.
Some people pay quarterly on this show. Some people don't. For the most part, it seems like people don't. I don't. And I've only heard of one person got a fine for it. And I can't remember what the reasoning or if what was different, but
I mean, the reason for me is that we don't know what our income is for the year. So how do you estimate a quarterly income tax? If you're doing well enough, it's not the end of the world to toss $1,000 to the government 4 times a year and then maybe get it back at the end, or some portion of it back at the end. So, I think it's your tolerance for pain and like how much you have to write on April 15th.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's why I feel like freelancers, like we always know that we're going to have to write a big check come tax time. And we just know that. So it's like, I could pay it quarterly, but I also could just save that in my account and knowing that it's going to April 15th, it's going to go away. You mentioned accountants. Do you file your own taxes?
Most years I do. This is the core of my nerdery and why I kind of dwell on it in class. And this year, besides 2 full weeks of lectures and a guest who's a tax attorney who comes in, I'm going to make them file a fictitious tax return, and everyone's going to get some W-2s and 1099s. So
that's a good, I would hate that assignment, but that is a good assignment.
That's my new level of torture this year. But I really enjoy doing my own taxes because at the end of the day, what's the most time consuming, difficult, and organizational based component is getting the deductions together. And No accountant can do that for you. I guess if you had a complete business manager scenario, if you were an A-list designer who had those resources, then yes, then you're not you're not personally scanning receipts in or what have you. So for me, I always found that getting that together was the hard part. Filling out some forms was the easy part. Last year with buying this truck and my completely legal scheme was I hit some roadblocks on the paperwork. I sent it to my tax lawyer friend, and he was like, "Oh, this is hard. This is really complicated." So I did get a accountant. I got an extension and then an accountant to do last year, and maybe maybe we'll maintain that relationship. I always made sure to use like if there was a life event like getting married or buying a house, or to go and use an accountant that year and kind of understand if I missed anything. If there's something they know that I don't, then use that as a template for my own, not to steal someone's work, but it's just to like, oh, they put a number in a box on this form. What is that number? That's how I found out about QBI, qualified business income,
yeah,
deduction, which I do not believe can be taken by a performing artist, but I'm not a performing artist. I'm a specialty designer, and that's the account code or whatever the industry code that I put on the Schedule C, because lighting designer is not a category. And if you've tried to get liability insurance in New York State, lighting designer is certainly not an actuarial category by any stretch of the imagination. So that digression aside, I found out about that one, and that dropped my tax bill by like half. It was huge. So it's good to go to a professional sometimes if you're an intrepid nerd like myself who likes to do the paperwork and do the filing alone. Even if I'm going to see someone, I still want to know kind of what to expect. And sometimes I do it 6 months in advance and use last year's deductions as a template and understanding the work that's coming in. And so like I did a scratch version for this pickup truck idea when it was all starting to come to fruition, to make sure that like I wasn't going to buy an expensive car for no reason.
I love that you're like, I'm disorganized, I'm crazy, I'm madness. I also just did a sample tax filing for fun.
Well, yeah, it's chaotic. I'm not organized, but chaotically so. I use a thing called, it's excel1040.com maybe. You can just Google Excel 1040, and it is some delightful nerd in Texas puts together an Excel of the entire 1040 and all its forms, and it does all of the math, and it will error out if you miss something. So it is so great. And I would really encourage playing with it. If you're feeling it, because I tried TurboTax once long ago, and I believe you in a previous episode talked about using it, and like 18 hours later abandoned ship because it doesn't understand who we are. I mean, I suppose QuickBooks probably, or like a more professional application that's not for an end user might, but like we have deduction categories that I know how to name because I did work with accountants from time to time, like professional viewing. That is something that you have to understand how to add on their Schedule C and use correct terminology that's not going to unduly flag your return. Also, I should throw in there that one year I went to a highly recommended entertainment accountant because I had what was then a good year for me. It's now like silly. And I bought some moving lights that I was then going to rent to shows for like $1,000 for whatever the lighting budget for the show was. So I got my used moving lights. It was like a $10,000 purchase, but I had 6 musicals in the next year that could amateurize that purchase over a year. I was just laying it out in advance. And all of them wanted to do like Mamma Mia with a $2,000 lighting budget that was going to run 7 weeks. And it's like, there's no, I'll get one LED park hand for that rental budget. So, a longstanding thing for me is I've always invested in my career on a kind of like a gear side of things, even if it's just like makes my life nicer, like having nice touch screens that I can, if I'm doing a show within driving distance, I can bring my big touch screens and have my magic sheets on my tech table in a way that I like, or a nice headset because I live my life on a headset sort of thing. So I got an accountant that year because I wanted to dot all the I's and cross the T's, and she wouldn't agree to deduct those moving lights she wanted to depreciate them. She didn't want to do that The same thing I did with the truck, the Section 179, 1 year depreciation, which is completely okay. So I ended up firing that firm. I paid the $600 and I did it myself and I got audited, which is like the terrifying, everyone just clenched, right?
Yeah.
So the audit came and it wasn't like
I laughed, but everyone else clenched.
It wasn't a Jim Comey-esque like ruin your life audit. They were auditing 3 lines on my on my Schedule C, and that one was travel expenses, one was the purchases, like the Section 179 depreciation purchases, and something else I don't remember, maybe meals or something like that. But so I got all my records together because I was organized. I sat up all night with the laser printer on the floor, printing, filing. I had it all: calendars, contracts, anything I needed to prove that I earned a job legitimately, that it was in Wisconsin. I did have to buy a ticket to Wisconsin. And we sat down and went through the audit. It was about an hour and a half. She just kind of cross-referenced that certain expenses were legitimate. And I think the thing that flagged it was there was a year-over-year change. Like, it was a busy year, a lot of travel. I think my AirPods are going to die, so I'm going to switch real quick.
Okay.
Good timing. So that's what flagged it. She just needed to verify that. And at the end, gave me a little bit of advice, and we discovered an error, and the error was in the government's advantage. So I actually came out with a $1,400 check from that audit, which is I was doing something right insofar as I didn't cheat the government. I cheated myself. And the thing that I was doing wrong, and now again, go to your tax professional and don't fully take my advice, but this is, the government gave me money for this, is that I was deducting 50% off of my meals when I was away. That is not a business meal. That is travel expenses, and that is a full deduction. So when you're on the road more than, I believe, 100 miles away from your domicile, can take your full, whatever you spend on meals. I actually use the GSA per diem rates instead of keeping every receipt from every Starbucks and McDonald's in Indianapolis.
Can you mention that? Because I just discovered that this year when I was doing TurboTax. I discovered that I had been saving all these receipts when I could have just been doing the auto deduction.
Yeah. So GSA, I think, is like government accountability, something. I don't know.
Like if you Google what is
GSA
the per diem rate in this city, that's the website that's going to show up.
I just Google GSA per diem. I have a little spreadsheet where it does the math for me that I made. And you go, okay, you put in Indianapolis, Indiana, and it's going to say $62 a day. And, if you go out for a nice steak dinner, sure, that's probably more than $62. But most days you're in tech, you go to Starbucks 4 times, Subway sandwiches, and maybe one dinner, which I think in the end either comes out a wash or a little bit in my benefit. To take $62 a day instead of 9 plus 4 plus 6 plus 12 plus 18. I feel like
and you don't have to save the receipt.
Correct.
Like, you don't have to save any of your Starbucks receipts, any of your Subway receipts, I can't believe I learned this after 11 years.
And your travel days are 75% of that city's rate. I often travel gig to gig to gig, so I just choose one city for that travel day.
Well, and because I deduct, like, I have this Excel sheet of like days out of town or whatever. So I give this to the accountant. They may have been doing this all along, actually, probably so. But the only difference being I had been saving and itemizing all the things when I didn't need to. I already have the days out of town earmarked. So then if you know the GSA amount, because I always put the city name and the zip code there, so that if they don't know, they can figure it out.
Right. So you're a good client for this accountant.
I am. I've been complimented. I consider myself very disorganized, and they told me a couple of years ago, they were like, "We wish everybody like you would do this."
I was just mistakenly putting it in the meals and entertainment category, which is a business meal. If you're buying for more than 2 people, you can write off as long as it's for and about business, but it's only 50% of the. So I was doing that math in error on my travel expenses. And at that point, I think I was traveling 280 days out of the year. It was major. So it actually put me into a loss for that year for the first and only time. Once she fixed it.
That's amazing. And actually, throwing back to our day rate, figuring out the day rate situation, for like this show in Branson, they were asking me for a fee. And so I was cobbling how I figure out the fees. I cobble a bunch of day rates together, including prep days and all that and travel. But one of the things I did was I looked up the per diem in Branson, Missouri, which they didn't have in GSA. So it's just Missouri generic.
You're right. I work a lot in Vermont. It's the same way.
Yeah. But that's how I figured out my per diem is I just took that number and put it into my day rate. So it was like the day rate that I wanted for designing and programming, and then adding on the per diem. Anyway, so I'm just talking about how to figure out a fee. So I'll have links to all these things, all these sites and stuff we're saying in the show notes, or at artisticfinance.com/175.
Hey, that's a nice number.
But anyway, I just want to clarify it with you. So what you use to file your taxes is Excel 1040?
No, you cannot. Well, I bet you could print that and mail it, but he says not to. Also, this guy has you can donate money for the services through like PayPal or something, and I do as a thank you for like I don't do it every year, but
no, I would too if I were using it, because TurboTax I think for me was upward of 450. Just because I had multiple states, and because they charge it's like $60 an extra state or something like that, and then I was also filing jointly, so I think that bumps it up as well.
Now this 1040 is only for federal. You have to go do your state stuff manually. So I go to the IRS website. I use an e-filing tool that I have to always remember what it's called every year. But you can just kind of directly input. So I use the Excel as the calculator functionally, because the IRS's tools don't do a ton of math for you. They'll flag errors, but it doesn't say, oh, you have to go to this form and fill this out. So it's like, oh, you want to put a value in this window. Now you also need to attach a Schedule C, and then it gives you Schedule C, and you go through that. So it's not too bad. And then the state stuff, I think I usually just print it and do it by hand and mail it in because I'm a dinosaur.
Well, you're a dinosaur, and also I think it's easier that way, depending on the state.
And I have to say, I haven't had to file in other states a whole lot. I know this is a thing in our industry, and it's always confused me. Every state is different, so I can't speak to all of them, but I generally only make W-2s in New York. And so if your 1099 doesn't have the information that taxes have been taken out, as long as you're not, there's different rules for every state on how much you can earn from a business in that state. But if you're not on site, like the cruise ship stuff is all Florida, which doesn't have state tax anyway, but I don't go to Florida. I go to Italy to do this work. I go to Spain. So I don't have to file a Florida tax return. That's a kind of a murky example because of their taxation laws. But so it's mostly if you have W-2, or like Connecticut always takes out tax. They have this performing artist tax thing. So you do file in Connecticut, things like that. But so I don't know. I've always felt like everyone always talks about doing 8 state returns, and just because you made money in that state doesn't necessarily mean you have to make. You probably didn't make enough to warrant filing a return in wherever. Often the line's like around $10,000. So
interesting. Now, like, have I been filing taxes in states I didn't need to? Who knows?
And I asked that of the accountant I currently have. So I'm still waiting on the return, but he said, yeah, you don't have a ton of other states to do necessarily.
Nice. Got it. Okay. All right. Let's talk about your retirement. Do you have a retirement plan?
I do. Well, do I have a personal plan? No. Are there plans that are supposedly helping me in the future? Good thing I'm married to a saver and a smart person. I do have several retirement accounts.
Okay. What are all they?
So through USA, through the union, I have the pension. I looked it up. I will tell you what I'm going to make now at 65. If I retire at 65 and take a single life draw out of it, after 14 years of union work, I would make $1,327 a month. And I understand from people who've been career long that like some people aren't even making that. And so here I am 14 years in, I have 25 years to retire. So I get, assuming I'm a lighting designer until death, I could triple that maybe. Mm-hmm. And that is not enough to live on. So I wanted to go to that exact number because it's nice to have a defined benefit pension is really a rarity in the US these days. But, even through some really good years on union contracts, right now, $1,300 that's a week or 2 weeks. So that's not good. So you've got to have your own accounts. the union does have a 401k that I don't know where I stand. That one's kind of sitting there idle.
Oh, that's good that you have it. I don't have 401k through the union.
So I used to do lighting, fashion work for IMCD lighting, and in their contract they have employer match. So
Nice.
I was doing that, and then some Broadway work you can self-contribute on the Broadway contract to the 401k. So I have a little in there. Also Broadway work, you get the IATSE annuity. I cashed out. There was an opportunity to do that in the pandemic. I pulled it because there was so little in there, and I wasn't planning on doing Broadway work anymore to any great extent, or for a very long time until I'm famous. I just pulled it out and I put it in my IRA. So I have a Roth IRA. Then through school, I self-pay into a 403b, and I opted not to go into the pension here, but go into their retirement plan that's investment based. I thought I already have a decent and well-funded pension, that I should go have something more market based. I don't know. And it's portable. Like if I left this institution and moved to California, California wouldn't pay into my New York State employees pension. Some schools have this plan, like my alma mater. I could take this and actually go teach at my alma mater and be in the same retirement plan. So I opted for that. That's like the overview, and I don't know how that all fits together yet.
That sounds like good. Because I've done Broadway work, but I'm not vested in the pension.
After you said that to Carol, and I was reading up on it, and you must have quite a gap.
Well, I just wasn't working on union contracts as much as I need to. That's really it. Like I did so much like design work that was either not on a union, or I was on TV for a while, like doing those contracts that weren't. So I just have never had the 5 years in a row. So, and there's a chart you can go on Ben Circo and look at your chart, and I can see where I would, if I ever do vest, like what I would get. But because of the gaps, because you can only have a 1 year gap within a 5 years. And I don't quite understand the rules, but but now for me, like I'm not going to vest this year. I didn't vest last year.
Are you getting vesting service? Are you getting vesting credit?
No. Because it boils down to, I just didn't do enough on contracts to get the full vesting credit for 5 years.
I guess I vested early just out of dumb luck, I guess, and working.
Yeah.
So I never really thought about that. So when I heard that, I was like, oh
yeah. It's basically I chose to burn out like mid my 5 years, which was the wrong time to burn out.
But the thing is you're still earning contracts and contributing to your pension and earning hopefully some half or a whole pension credit. And at some point when you vest, which you don't have to do for until the end, like vesting early doesn't mean anything more for you. It's just a peace of mind thing to know that your pension will be.
Yeah, correct. Well, and for me, it's made me focus more on my non-union stuff, knowing that if I never do, like, because I just don't know what my future is, but I don't know that it's on union contracts. But I was going to mention the 403b. So when I was that year in Phoenix, I had a choice between pension or the 403b plan, which is portable. And I chose that option because I wasn't sure what my future was going to be there. And I made the right choice because I was able to keep at least some of that with me. So I have like 4,000 from that 1 year, which is nice. Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds all great. And presumably you'll have Social Security because you've been paying into that. Outside of retirement, do you invest?
No. And this is, I don't want to get on my soapbox, but I really wanted to talk to you about this because I feel like I'm missing out somewhere, but I also deeply down inside feel that the stock market is immoral. And I am disinterested. And now I know my retirement is all in the market. But it's not something I think about or have much control over. I can maybe on certain ones, I can, like my 403b, I can say how aggressive I want it to be. So I said middle, of course, because but I don't know. It feels like economics in general is made up, and it's all about the value of nothing set by people who I'm just not a capitalist at the end of the day, even though, it's like, oh, I understand that I'm doing my work in a commercial business that can fetch more money. Not that I don't like money or having money or the things money brings, but I don't know. I just fundamentally hate it, therefore have chosen not to participate. And yet, like my business partner, he was my associate for a long time, and now we're partners in our cruise work. He's a 26-year-old genius, and at like 16 years old to invest. And he did, and he does very well for himself. He got into crypto and got out of crypto, and he finds joy in that. And then I'm like, what are you're doing at 26? What I am really too scared to ever contemplate doing. Anyway, that's where I don't invest. And I don't know if you have anything that you can tell me that says, shut up and just open an E-Trade account and start buying tenths of Apple shares.
I love your hot take and philosophy and your soapbox. You had warned me about this ahead of time. You said, I would love for you to sort of convince me to invest. And so I did. I have my reasons and I'm going to give them to you. However, you are in capitalism and you have to play by those rules. And so I can't help you with the not wanting to be in capitalism situation and the immorality of it. Like the morality discussion, I can't help you with that at all.
You're not a priest.
My thought is you have to take care of yourself, and you're here in the United States of America. So how do you do that for yourself?
It's sort of the inverse of my tax thing. Like I believe in taxation and pulling your weight, but also I'm in America and the tax code is what it is, and I can write off the dumb truck. Yeah.
So and then the other thing is that I don't think you need to invest. Like if you don't want to, because I would argue that your pension and all that, like that's investing enough because like why are you investing, right? Because you want security. I feel like is really what it is about. And in theory, the retirement savings is all for your security in the future. So I feel like that's enough, like working and putting it in toward that. And the more you work, the more Social Security you pay. To me, that is investing. And also the home purchase you have, like the sweat equity and the paying off the mortgage. That to me, I know everyone's like, well, housing is a house and it's for living and all that. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. But also it is an investment.
But that house has like an imaginary $250,000 that I did not earn attached to it that will be mine someday if I sell it. To me, that's an investment.
Yeah. And that imaginary
investment because you use it up, but the house you never use up. It always appreciates, right?
I'm sure real estate people could explain how that imaginary $200,000 equity is actually real because like you painted it and you bought it. Like nobody else went and bought it. That magic would have happened whether you bought it or somebody else bought it. And it just happened to be you. I don't see that as immoral.
Oh no.
Yeah. Okay. So here's my reasoning of why I think you should invest. But again, saving, you said you're married to a saver. I think that's wonderful. And I think saving is half the battle of investing. Investing people would say, no, Ethan, that is not right. Like you have to invest. But the way I look at it for freelancers with fluctuating income, saving the money, that's the important step. Like that's the really important step. Yeah. Could you put it in Bitcoin and it go way to the moon? Sure. And that would be awesome. But like the saving part is great. Like, cause if you didn't have anything to put into Bitcoin, like nothing would happen. Okay. So I think you're doing just fine. I will say the reasons why I think investing is important. Okay. Financial security, meaning that like going into the arts don't always pay. You don't always figure out how to make a lot of money or a steady income. You need to invest because the freelance world is fluctuating and not reliable. And you could break your leg, right? Retirement planning, I mentioned I'm not vested in the union pension. So in my sense, like investing is my retirement plan. Like I have to take care of my retirement plan. Like, yes, there's Social Security that I'll have access to. Maybe I'll get vested in that pension, but I have to take care of my own retirement. That's why I think investing is important. Beating inflation. So this goes into your house purchase, that imaginary $200,000. Real estate, gold, Bitcoin, those are things that are not tied to inflation. So it doesn't matter what the dollar does. It doesn't matter how people view money or like what money is valued in different things. The value of those things is that they're not tied to inflation. So regardless of who's in political office or how that's all faring out, investing in something like that is to beat inflation. So I don't know. I don't understand inflation or how to beat it or whatever, but I know that's an important thing and why that people invest in those types of things. And in a way, going into morality, like buying gold, like that's understood sort of thing. So you could invest in that. And it's like the least capitalistic of it, if that makes sense. Like, because gold is just gold, right?
Yeah.
So like, what's wrong with having jewelry or something that could also be a financial? But anyway, so why beating inflation is important is like, if you're saving and inflation goes up. You mentioned you bought a car for $5,000 15 years ago, something like that. If you had saved that $5,000 and it was still $5,000 today, you probably wouldn't be able to buy the used car for $5,000.
Maybe I should just put that $5,000 in an investment account.
That's a good point. Like, had you put that, instead of buying the car, if you had bought it doesn't work like this, but had you put that in an investment account, it would be, I don't know what it, like with you doing nothing, it would be $20,000 today. Okay. Also passive income. Like, that's a thing that if you research financial advice is like, oh, you have to have passive income. Like, that's how you become wealthy. And my thought with that is investing can lead, like dividend stocks and all that can lead to passive income. And that's like, we can't be at a tech table forever. Like, we can't always be working. So it's important for us as freelancers to also have some sort of passive income.
I think the one thing that the one human being who will be at a tech table forever is Ken Billington, however, and I'm sure has plenty of investments in passive income.
Correct. I don't know his details and I don't need to get into it, but I believe when he was on the show, he's like, oh yeah, I'm here at my house in the Hamptons that I own. And then I decided to buy the neighbors, and then I bought those neighbors.
But when he leaves that house, he's going right back to a tech table.
Oh yeah.
When most other people would be like sipping the Long Island iced tea on the Hamptons porch.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other two things for why I think you should invest is tax benefits. And you actually mentioned this already a little bit with like the truck purchase and stuff like that. Money that you put into a retirement account, which I'm counting that as investing. Like, you can invest in you can mark that money off on your taxes. Or if you're a bad investor and you lose money, you can like write off the loss. So it's like, if you have $10,000 in your savings account, that's not going to change every year. So even if it goes, like, it won't go down to 9,000, that's good. But you would be able to write that $1,000 loss off on the taxes. So like, then is it a loss? Yes, but also not. And then vice versa, if you were to put $10,000 into like a SEP IRA, you get to deduct your taxes by $10,000. So that's another reason. There's like tax loss harvesting and all that. I don't know enough about that. I've read about it. I've watched videos on it. When we had a financial advisor, they sort of explained it a little bit, and I still don't get that. So anyway, I can't speak to that part of it, but there are those strategies as well. And then the last thing is compound interest, which actually, when you and I do the class where I come in, you're the one that always talks about compound interest, and you'll pull up a chart.
Came from my lighting mentor in college, who was the one who did any sort of career prep for us in Norman Coates. He at the end of talking about lighting design for 3 years solid, electrics being a completely different area of study, there's not so much you can talk about anymore. So he got into some lifestyle stuff, or some life lessons, and one of those was getting your Schedule C income as close to zero as possible through deductions. And I generally write off, and I track this, between 70 and 80%. So I get close. And then the other was, he just put this chart in front of us that is compound interest, and it's fictitious, but it's like, you start investing for your retirement is the frame at 21, and you stop at like 35, you will have more than if you start at 35 and continue till 70. So imagine if you start at 21 and keep going. So, it just shows the exponential nature of how it works. And then you could invert that and say that's also how credit card debt works. And boy, isn't it really unfair that like a savings account, you get 5% APY, and like a credit card these days is like 15-20%. Wow, it's really just rigged to help the rich. Okay, I'm off.
Yeah.
I'm off. So,
okay, but this is where the compound interest thing, which our episode with Stan K, he really went into it, and we also did one with Patty Hirsch, and they explain it fairly eloquently of how important it is and all that. So go listen to those episodes if you want to hear about it, or just Google it, because it's such an important concept that always wows me even though I know about it, when I relearn about it, it's just like amazing. So I profiled you and guessed your age is 40. I'm so proud. And I went and asked ChatGPT, which was down, so it didn't help me. But if it could give me examples of, if you were to invest $10,000 at age 40, okay, what you would have at age 70. And so I got 4 different situations. Let's say, for example, you're 40, right? And you take $10,000 this year, and you invest it. what you're going to get by 70. So I have this chart in the document that we shared, the outline. I don't know if you can look at it. So the first example I did was if you put $10,000 into a high yield savings account this year, and those are roughly paying 5% interest these days. If you were to put in $10,000 right now at 40, not add anything to it, but just keep it in that high yield savings account, by the age of 70, you would have $43,000, right? So that's why it's important to investing. And then this goes back to why I'm saying saving is the most important, because if you save that $10,000, like, and have $10,000, it will grow just by putting it in the bank by their compounding interest. But arguably that's not investing. That's just letting your cash sit there. And $43,000 by age 70 will probably be like what it would be like if you had $10,000 today. You know what I mean? So basically you're keeping pace with inflation. Okay. So that's if you just put your money in your savings account because you're a good saver doing that and you added nothing more. Now, if you decided I'm going to save $10,000 this year and every year I'm going to add $10,000 more in, but I'm not going to invest it. I'm just going to keep it in that high yield savings account. By the time you're 70, you will have $600,000. And so I don't know what that is. 10,000 times 30, is that 300,000? So you will have put in 300,000, but it will basically double to 600,000. So that's why I'm saying saving is important. To get to that 600,000 just by saving, you can do it. Okay. All right. So then I went with, if you invest your money into the stock market or something that's going to give you an annualized 7% return. And 7 is conservative because I roll conservatively. And 7% is like not that much more than the 5% savings. Anyway, so historically, since 1957, the stock market has returned 10.5% a year. But I'm going with 7% just to be super conservative. Like, yeah. Okay. So if you were to take $10,000 and invest it at 7% interest and not add anything more to it over 30 years, just let it sit there, it would get to $76,000. So not crazy, but again, that's just investing versus keeping it in a high.
It's almost double on the savings account.
Yeah. Now, if you were to do that thing where you put $10,000 in every single year, and in my example, I don't quite know how the math was calculated, but I said put $10,000 in at the beginning of the year. So versus like $1,000 a month, something. Anyway, so if you were to put $10,000 this year into a savings account and then invest it in the stock market and in the S&P 500 and get 7%, which is a very conservative estimate that would actually happen, $10,000 and adding it every year would turn into $1 million by the age 70. So that's why I think it's important to invest, because if you were to do 10,000 every year saving, you would end up with 600,000. Great. But if you invest it, you end up with $1 million.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just the compound interest.
So riddle me this, like, there's no realm in where I'm going to go open an E-Trade account and pick and choose stocks, or what I have no idea. Like, I know there's words called mutual funds, and I know there's words called like T-bonds. Yeah. That's probably like from World War I. What's like, can you have just a generalized investment account where it's done on your behalf and you kind of set it and forget it?
Yes. Okay. So every company that offers, like Schwab or Fidelity is what Nicole and I have. All of them have options. Like, you can just say set it and forget it, and like they'll take a fee or they won't take a fee depending on like what they're doing and what all that. So, but you can just open up an account anywhere.
Is this a brokerage account?
A brokerage account. Yeah.
Okay.
The way I always open it up is I'm like, where can I open up one for free? That's just how but nowadays that's like almost every place you can. Okay. And then I also do like, where can you not get a fee for trading? So like, say you put in your $10,000 and you buy $10,000 of the S&P 500, who's not going to charge me a $10 fee to purchase that? And like Fidelity doesn't. And almost no place does anymore, just of how it is. But yeah, but the thing of the picking, so there's different options, and the beauty of investing, and this is Nicole and I's philosophy. So like right now we have a brokerage account. We also broke up with our financial advisor, which is awkward because they're a patron of this show.
No. Oh, I remember that episode.
And actually, we loved them and we had them for like 10 years, but they kept switching companies. And this last one, we were moving from Phoenix to St. Louis and it was just like too much. And I was like, I'm sorry, I can't do this on my plate right now. And he's like, it's just a DocuSign. And I was like, I just can't. Like, I just don't have the bandwidth. And so they just abandoned us. And that's why we're in Fidelity, is because they put us all in there in the first place. Anyway, more of the story. So what we actually do with our brokerage account, our investing account, is we just purchased the S&P 500. And I picked the lowest cost index fund. And then we put money in every month and it goes straight into the S&P 500. And there's no fee in purchasing it because Fidelity doesn't charge that depending on how you do it. So the money goes in a couple of days, they purchase the S&P 500 for us, which adds into our one stock that we hold, which is the S&P 500 index. And when I was saying that 7% return, like S&P 500 is the market, it is the index. So we're just buying into the United States market. Anyway,
it seems eminently doable and like I don't have to sully my hands with.
Well, and like again, I don't want to give financial advice, but I'm telling you, like that's what we do. That's like after all this, I mean, this is why I do the 6K investment specials. Is like what I keep learning every single episode when I check on the investments I picked is I picked way wrong. I don't know if I would have doubled my money at this point, but like had I just picked the S&P 500, I would just have doubled the money. Whereas instead I tried to do other things. And Warren Buffett, like that's the age old advice. So anyway, I would be happy to answer questions for you at some point in the future if you're like, okay, I want to do it. But like the beauty of it is it's so simple. Like to do the right thing is so simple. And everybody always does the wrong thing because like they want to trade, or like the person you were talking about, your associate who likes to trade Bitcoin because they get joy from that. Like they like doing that. That's like historically, everybody always says like those people end up with less money than had they just invested in the boring, safe thing.
This all makes me want to go put $10,000 and like go to my TIAA craft, which is where some of my retirement stuff is, and just open a brokerage account and say do and here. But I have one fear, and so my husband has investment accounts, and my parents, I remember this, and I know that this is just the cycle and it's just the long game, but there are the days where the stock market takes a dive and he goes, I lost $90,000 today or whatever. My parents lost $500,000 because whatever. And it's like, oh God, I don't know if I can deal with the heart palpitation. I mean, it's not necessarily money that he personally lost. It's that funny money, like the $200,000 that my house earned by existing, but it's in danger. I don't know. That gives me the willies, but I understand, like that's at just a base level. I intellectualize that it's like this happens. If you're investing over a course of 30 or 40 years, this is going to happen, and you just suck it.
Well, let me assuage that, because here's the deal. You're a busy person, Travis. You will probably not be checking this every day.
No.
When you get the news that like there was an earthquake or some crazy thing that's a COVID happens, right? You're going to go check your account and be like, oh my gosh, my money is half of what it was. But like, you're not going to pull it out. Again, this is why like the statistics are out there that the people who trade and do all that end up with less, is because what hurts you is being out of the market. That's why the safe, smart, wise thing is to just always be in the market, because like those drops, yes, they're going to drop. But again, that's the thing where if you're putting in your $10,000 every year, you're going to put it in sometimes when the market is low. And then it's always going to come back, like until the end of the world. That's to your advantage in a way, because you're then buying in at a lower rate. So those things are actually good for you. And yes, you can look at your market and be like, oh, I lost $90,000 today. That's a bummer. But like, it's either going to bounce back tomorrow or whatever. But the other thing is, if you start with $10,000, yeah, the market crashes, right? Say it goes down 20%, which is huge. Like that would be huge if it were to go down 20%, right? So you put in your $10,000. The next day it crashes 20%, you're down to $8,000. Okay, you lost $2,000. That's a bummer, but like not the end of the world. Now you get to 10 years down the line where you've been putting in your $10,000 and you have $200,000 in the market crashes 20%, and you're like, oh my gosh, now I'm down to 180. I just lost 20,000. Again, huge, but like you've been accumulating this for 10 years. So it makes sense. You have more money in the account, therefore you're losing money. So, I mean, I don't think it would be a problem for you at all, because you're living your life, doing your own thing. Every once in a while you would look, but like you're saying, it's all imaginary. This is all imaginary.
Yeah. I mean, everything
So,
is set to auto pay in my life for a reason. I take too much onto my plate.
and every time I get in trouble is when my auto pay messes up.
Oh my God. My fear is like losing a credit card and having to get a new credit card number. I have a spreadsheet that after one of those and like getting the cable turned off, it was like, okay, that.
Well, and
Or
now
like,
PayPal, you can sign up for things through PayPal. And I love that because it's like if the credit card
oh,
goes wrong, then the PayPal will stay and it'll just replace the card.
that's forever. PayPal's forever.
But like
Amazing.
not all places do that. Like our mortgage place doesn't do that. Like, okay, we have talked way too long.
Oh my God, we have.
I am so sorry. We were supposed to go an hour and we're at 2.5 right
I'm
now.
fine. I hope you're fine. You're going to have an editing job.
Yeah, I'm good. I wouldn't have. Yeah, I'm good. And I assumed you were good. So thank you. I mean, I feel like we knew this was going to go a little long. I did not anticipate. This is only like the third time I've gone this long. Okay, so I'm just going to blast through these last questions just because we have to. Do you give to charity or give back to the universe in any way?
I'm not going to lie and say I give to podcasters.
Yes.
Multiple podcasters. And you did not prompt me to say this to plug the Patreon, but I am a patron and a fan of the show. But I should be doing more now that I'm in a position to give. And when you asked this of a guest recently and I was listening to you, I was like, oh, okay. It was not a guilt moment. I don't really suffer from that. No. But it just made me reevaluate. Like, you know, I would always give to a favorite theater when they had hard times or a flood or what have you. But there's so many like good approaches that it doesn't have to be a politics donation or a podcast Patreon account.
Yeah. Well, that's something that's always bothered me because there's so many GoFundMe's in my world and the world, health things or whatever. And it's always bugged me that GoFundMe's are not tax deductible, which again, not giving because of the tax deduction, but it just always like rubbed me the wrong way of like, why do we have it where people have to go on for their health care? I'm donating to their health care and it's not deductible. Anyway, more of the story to say is like when you give to charity, it was always bothered me because it's like, well, I give money out and it's charitable in my brain, but is it officially giving to charity? No. Yeah. Anyway, no, but that's a question. I don't know. I still don't like that question, but I ask it anyway.
Yeah, but it gave me a little like, I am now in a place of more privilege than I already had to help those in need, and like I actually think it's a really good question.
Okay, I'll stick with it.
Making me reevaluate my own self.
And also, while we're here, thank you for being a patron of the show. Many thank yous. Okay, a couple new questions that you might not know about because I just threw them in sort of when Don Holder was here for no reason. Anyway, a couple new questions, which is you work with fellow designers and you work with assistants and associates. Do you help them negotiate their pay?
I wouldn't say I'm at any point in my career where I can hire an associate on a theater gig where their pay isn't going to be just really dictated by the theater or the situation or contract. Whereas like sometimes a Broadway designer can go to bat for you, or sometimes they prefer to leave it up to you and your handling. And I think both ways are correct. When I take on a project managerial role on the cruise ship project and I'm hiring people, I'm now their employer. But I also create my quotations very transparently. I show exactly what I'm paying everybody. I don't mark it up, which is probably a giant business no to not mark up money that's coming in that I have to do paperwork for and liability insurance for and all that stuff. So I keep just a very transparent policy, or I kind of in both directions. And with those assistants and electricians, I tell them what I know the cruise ship, what that cruise line's threshold for paying is on pay. We pitch it out at the high end of that and then work from there. So because I have a lot of experience with some of these companies and in the industry and understand what it can bear to some extent and have gotten into having conversations with as many people who are willing, not to like get their secrets and try and one up anybody, but just in fellowship, try and understand, we're dealing with giant corporations. And it's not about sticking it to a corporation, but it's different than working in a small theater where rates are kind of set. So, and nobody teaches you how to price yourself. Wow, that was a windy way to say I negotiate on behalf of my employees and I'm transparent to my employer and they're not my employees, my contractor, and I'm not an employee of the cruise line. So that's how it works. It's all contractor based. And I assume that's all about liability, and taxes on both sides of the coin.
I think that's great. Yeah, I also think sharing numbers is like just a good, like, transparencies both ways. And I'm sort of the same way when I was doing that Branson job, and we were like trying to get to their number they wanted to get to. Like, I was just sharing my little spreadsheet that with them. I was like, this is what I'm trying to get to, and this is. But I think it's so helpful to say numbers, because if your number's off, like, people are going to let you know.
Yeah.
Like if you're asking for too little, as much as there are producers that will take advantage, etc., most people are going to be like, that's too low. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I did a commercial gig. I won't name which one it is. And it's a producer I've worked with a bunch. And well, they're not the producer. They're more like the production management side of it and logistics side. So, but I negotiate with them. And the fees have been kind of all over the place. And it's just what the producer has budgeted for that gig. And they're very honest with me. And they asked me to bid a show. And I think, and it was a commercial gig. And I think I bid it at like $4,500 plus some previs time on a day rate. The guy came back and he said, okay, we did go to someone else first, which, sucks if they're my standard, one of my normal guys, but that's okay. And they said, and they bid 25,000 for the job. And I bid 4,500. So he goes, how about 9,000 plus previs?
Wow.
And so that was like one of the first times an employer ever came to me and said, you're underbidding yourself, which is very fascinating, very fascinating. So it's not all bad out there. And I think negotiating is not something that anybody loves to do. But once, I think the thing that's helped me is just to remove the personal out of it. And on a business side, it's not whoever you're negotiating with, it's not their money out of their pocket. It's a budget line. On my side, I can, like you said with your spreadsheet and sharing, like, this is how I'm thinking about this. And I kind of came to that conclusion after pricing out the fashion shows for IMCD. I got to a point in that company where they trusted me to put together quotes. So I saw under the hood of their situation, but they had always, I admire that company so much, had always broken down a quote line item. And it wasn't like lighting for a fashion show, $100,000. It was gear rental, design fee, design labor, electrics labor, and trucking. It line itemed it in such a way that any producer could look at that and go, I get it. That design fee is a little big. And that's the one, like, that one's a little fluid. You can negotiate on a design fee a little more than you can say, yeah, but my electricians make $35 an hour. So that kind of opened my mind to going, this is just, it's not personal. And it's just we're just bidding. So if you put it into that business mindset, which is hard to do at a regional theater because that budget's set a year out, you're not going to get much. And there's not much to get conversely. And this is why I never had an agent, because my career for so long was all about regional theater and assisting. It was like, why am I going to pay someone 10% of my income in order to get a better rental car? Because that's what it can bear in regional theater. The only other thing I ever really negotiate for, wow, this was not a negotiating prompt here, but the only thing I ever negotiate for, and this is my own personal craziness, is, and I will walk away from a job, and I mean, to a logical extent, is you are not handling my travel. I handle my travel and you reimburse me, and we can negotiate on like how much that reimbursement limit is. And I will eat some to take my airline of choice, the flight I want at the time I want. But like, my life is too complicated for you to put me on a 6 a.m. flight with 2 connections in order to go 800 miles because it costs $10 cheaper than the other flight that I requested. So, and then I get my miles and then I get my upgrades.
Yep. I feel like I've never run into issue with that.
Yeah, very few do. Just send me
the
price of the flight before you buy it. And you're like,
exactly. Because you have to send them all this personal information. Then they have to come back to you with like 5 flight options. Yeah. And then you have to say, I mean, I feel like the
downside of it in being your own travel agent is when shit hits the fan, you have to go fix it for yourself. So there's an element of like, if you're going to go that route, and honestly, if you're traveling for work, you've got to have enough room in that credit card to book a new flight, to deal with a hotel, an unexpected hotel or rental car problem. That's some hard won advice from like getting overcharged for an incidentals deposit on a 2-week hotel room and having no money left to eat for the rest of the week. That was an early career whoopsie. So like if you're out there traveling, you've got to have some money on hand or some credit on hand to deal with that stuff.
All right, I'm going to jump to the wrap up. Regarding finances, what advice would you give somebody who's starting their career right now?
Put down the credit card unless you're really on top of your stuff and have a lot of discipline. That's the one that was the 20-year problem. And if I think about the interest that I paid on having maxed out cards for 20 years, and boy, they knew how to get me. When you buy a house, your credit limits shoot through the roof and they meet out more over time. And I would be like, oh, great. Now my credit to debt ratio is balancing itself out. It's going to get under 50%. My credit score will go up. This is all great. And yet a new couch looked really good or whatever. And it just, and it was just a vicious cycle. So it's really, don't get into it. You need to have credit. You need to establish credit. It's a messed up system that we're in. So have the credit card, but keep those balances way low or not at all, and find a way to live within the means. And I'd say I never really did until the pandemic work outside this industry, but not a bad thing if you need to have a side hustle until you can make that money.
Yeah, and I say work outside the industry isn't a bad thing because it gives you perspective.
Yeah,
like
right.
Yeah, all these extra things are not bad because they just give you perspective on what you're doing. Okay, this is awesome. I'll end it with this classic one. Where can people connect with you and who do you want to connect with you?
Anyone and everyone who wants to be in this industry. I'm not much of a social media person, but I'm at Captain McHale on Instagram. And my website is travismchale.com.
Awesome. Amazing. All right, Travis, this was amazing. Almost 3 hours. Ludicrous.
Oh my God. I'm hungry.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ethan.
That's it for this week's episode. Because the interview was so long, I don't want to make it even longer with my takeaways, but I will say about retirement that Travis jokes that nobody wants to think about it at 21, but I'm 36 now, and today in prepping for this, I looked up my Social Security estimate, and it says that I can take Social Security in 2050. That's basically tomorrow, so woof. I always consider myself young, but the reality is I am a third of the way through my working years. So while no one needs to be focused on finances every day, it is important no matter what your age is to review everything and make sure you're taking the right steps, even if it is dry and boring. And if you can do this review early on in your career, even better, like Travis's associate who started at 16. But regardless of when you do it, it's going to be beneficial. As illustrated by the chart we showed that what happens when you start investing at age 40. And by the way, that visual is in the video version of this show, and you can find that YouTube link at artisticfinance.com/175. And like I said at the top of the show, if you're an educator and you want to use this episode or any of these resources in your classes, visit the Patreon page for this episode. So on that page, if you scroll to the bottom of the show notes, it includes a business in theater design slideshow, and you can use that in class. And again, it has the visuals of the compound interest that we talked through. There's also a homework assignment for your students, and that assignment works for any episode of this podcast. It doesn't just have to be this one. So if you wanted a costume designer to do that homework for a costume design episode of this show, you could do that, or a set designer, etc. I've also included a guest lecture outline that you can use if you want to replicate our conversation and invite a professional designer into your class to discuss these topics. And lastly, I include the map of my career that shows one job leading to another, etc. Now, in the name of academia, I've created all these files for your use for free, and you can get them at artisticfinance.com/175. The only thing I ask is that you keep the Artistic Finance logo intact and or consider becoming a patron of the show, which you can do at patreon.com/artisticfinance. The dad joke to end the episode: why did the lighting designer start a retirement plan early on in their career? Because they wanted their future to be lit. That's it for today. Until next time, break a leg.
Thank you for listening to Artistic Finance, where we interview successful artists, leaders, and investors to help educate and inspire the creative community. To access our show notes and resources, go to artisticfinance.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decision, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Artistic Finance. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.